And as they're arguing, I remember seeing my dad throw my mom down the stairs. And I remember my mom flying down the stairs. I mean, everything turns into like a slow motion kind of thing. And as she's going down the stairs, her arm went into the rail. And as her arm went into the rail, I started to see her arm break into little pieces, And as and she hits the bottom, so there's 2 sets of stairs and a little foyer at the bottom. She hits the bottom, and I remember looking at her, and what it reminded me of was like one of those Raggedy Ann dolls. Yeah. She was all broken up, and I'm thinking he killed her, and so, but my mom was, she was just as bad as my dad, I remember another time when my mom, my dad were arguing, and we're upstairs also. There's a bathroom there. My dad and my mom go into the bathroom, and I could hear them arguing, and my mom pulls out a gun to shoot my dad inside the bathroom, and my dad grabs the gun with his hand, so she shoots him in the hand. Wow. And so they were just as violent. It didn't matter. You know what I mean? It was just you were lucky if nothing happened. So if there was, drinking every day. My mom drank every day.
Pastor, so you had mentioned, I want you to talk about that incident, but I was trying to find a space to come in here. You had mentioned that when you were a little kid and you were in the gang, you were so crazy out there that they greenlit you. Yep. Can you talk about that before you talk about the incident?
Okay, well, it happened in 2 different situations. See, when I was 12 years old, we had the guys a bunch of us had gotten together, and we had started a little clique. I can't even remember the name of it. They had come to the house to kill me, the guys from Harbor City, from my neighborhood that I lived in, because of that. There was a guy named Casper that every time he'd see me, he would tell me that he was going to kill me, And so at that moment in my life, I shared with you that my dad was in prison. My dad had gotten out of prison. And when my dad got out of prison, he came home, he had some money, he bought me some shoes, bought some stuff for me and my brother, my sister. My dad took off. Him and my mom were no longer together, and he took off to Douglas, Arizona. And, I was being threatened so many times. I was being jumped. I had been beaten up by these gang members in Harbor City. So many things had happened that at that point in my life, one day we got this guy drunk. Now, I'm already living with a woman, okay? So she's, I'm gonna be 13. She's already 17. She's almost an adult. She's also a gang member from Barrio Avenues, which is a different gang. And he was actually setting it on the table. He was getting ready to set it on the table, and as he was setting it on the table, my homeboy had a sarape over him, and he threw the sarape up in the air. And when he threw it up, he pulled up a sawed-off. And it wasn't, your typical sawed-off shotgun. It was a sawed-off 22. That's what it was. And when he pulled, what happened was he beat him to the punch. He pulled the trigger, but the bullet got jammed. So when he threw the sarape and picked it up, my stepfather just automatically grabbed the gun and started to unload. So I'm standing behind him as he's shooting at him. And so my homeboy has pants on, huaraches, no shirt on, and I could actually see the bullets going in and out of his body. I remember walking in there, and they had her laying on this metal table. They had shot half of her face off. And I remember looking at her from a distance. My dad had gone with me, and he started to yell at me and tell me go see your mother. And he started to push me. And as he started to push me that way, I remember I said to him, and so I just became very bitter, more than what I already was, hateful. I became more violent to the point that I didn't care if I died. I didn't care if I killed someone. It didn't matter to me anymore. right after that, I had gotten into a argument with my brother-in-law, and I slit his throat 8 times. And I ended up in jail, and I remember being in jail and waking up and not knowing what happened. You know, because my mind was just warped. I was just messed up. And I remember when their guns sounded empty. Click, click. I came out with a gun in each hand. And I ran up to the car and I started to shoot inside the car. And I remember because they were young kids, they were young men. They were screaming. And they're going around in circles in the middle of the street, and I'm running with the car. My brother-in-law's with me. He's also shooting at the car. And they take off. No remorse, no fear, no nothing of the consequences. It didn't mean anything. Because at this time of my life, I was already numb. I didn't feel no pain, you know. And I remember walking up to him. And I remember these were the words he said to me. He says, I'm going to tell you something. I don't know what it means. He says, but you know what it means. And God knows what it means. And so he leans over and he says something in my ear. I don't even know what he said. To this day, I don't remember. I wish I did. He said something in my ear. And when he said these words, I remember getting a flashback of all the bad things I had done. Like in a second, everything. And then I remember just standing back because it was like real quick, you know. But everything was clear. And I remember looking at him, and then in my mind I thought, and if you do, I will serve you for the rest of my life. And when I said those words, I remember something hitting me in the back of my knees, and I fell on the ground, and I started to worship God. At that moment, I remember everybody. I mean, I couldn't tell you how many people. I looked like I had the football. You know what I mean? Everybody's piled up praying for me, and I wept, until all that pain was gone. Until all that from when I was a little boy, 7 years old, was gone.
Welcome back to another episode of LifeSpeaksPodcast.com. Thank you so much for joining us. We want to give a shout out to the Choosing Hope Foundation. Go to the website, choosinghopefoundation.org. See what they're doing over there, man. Wrapped around prison ministries, just doing big things out there. Check it out if you want to donate, or if you just want to see, or if you just want to just check it out and see what can happen. Hey, just see what can happen. Check out LifeSpeaksPodcast.com and be up on the info about our podcast. And thank you so much for watching. If you want to donate, you have an option on there. Next, the Potter's House, GRA.com with our church, the Universal Church in Universal City, Greater Randolph area, 2025 Universal City Boulevard. Come and check us out, see how God's moving. Let's check out the website. Once again, it's thepottersHouseGRA.com. And, man, just see how God is just moving over there. And it is awesome. Like, subscribe to our podcast, ring the bell so you get all the notifications. And thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, well, welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Huicho Breach, a.k.a. Luis Perez, or vice versa. We have a very special guest here with us today. We have my good friend, Pastor Frank Romero, and he's going to be sharing his testimony, his life, and we're just very blessed to have him on the podcast today, so we want to welcome, Pastor.
Thank you very much for having me here.
So, I've known Pastor Frank for quite a bit of years. I was first introduced to his ministry when I saw him preaching in the El Paso church, Pastor Paul Stevens Church. And and was just captivated by his testimony, the things that he was preaching and stuff. And so I reached out to him and got him to come preach for me. And he's actually preaching for me right now at Revival. And so we thought it would be a good idea to have him do the podcast and share, and not in a preaching format, but his testimony, because there's so much to it. There's so much power in it, and I believe that many people can benefit from it. And so we asked him if he would do it, and he said yes. And so we're blessed to have you here today. I want to start, we talked a little bit about it, but I want to go back, and you shared a little bit about it during the service, to your youth. As far as you can remember being a child, and what was life like growing up, and then, we'll ask some questions as we go through. But just take us back to your life back in the day, little kid, and the experiences and what led up to your life today.
So, at a very young age, I grew up in a decent home. Parents married, father, mother, good parents. Parents, my dad worked for American Airlines. My mom worked at different places, and we owned our own restaurant. We had a good life. You know what I mean? We'd go on vacations. We'd go to Mexico. We'd go to Disneyland. We went to all these places. We did what a normal family would do. But as time went by, the more money that my parents started to make, the more they started to drink. They're starting to hang around with different kinds of people. Different things are happening, and so they're taking advantage of it. And before you know it, there's adultery. You know what I mean? All kinds of stuff. My mom's cheating on my dad. My dad's cheating on my mom. And because of all that, my dad becomes very abusive. And my dad was the type of person that when he would start to drink, he'd grab shot glasses with his hand and break them until it would cut his hands and he would just bleed, And my mom was very violent also. She didn't care what she had to do. I remember a couple of times my dad, yelling at her, and she would hide behind a wall. I mean, they'd be drunk, and she'd hide behind a wall and grab a big bottle of Bacardi and just hit him over the head with it, knock him out, And so as things started to get worse, they started to lose everything they had. My dad lost his job at American Airlines. My mom, they lost their house. They had a couple of houses. They lost their business. And so we ended up living in the projects. We ended up moving. We lived in Compton, and from Compton, we ended up moving to
drinking, all these things. They lost the business. Yes. Now what happens?
They lose the business. They lose the houses. We end up moving to the projects. We have nothing, so we end up moving to government projects. As we move into these projects, things just get worse. They escalate to the point where my dad's getting even more violent, trying to commit suicide. My mom's always gone. She's always cheating on him and stuff like that. So we're talking about almost every weekend we'd have the cops at the house.
How old are you at this time, Pastor?
I'm 7 years old.
Okay.
I'm 7 years old, and so I'm watching all this drama. I remember sitting on top of the stairs one time and with my brother and my sister, and we could just hear them downstairs, and they're fighting and throwing stuff, and we'd start crying. We'd start crying. My sister was the oldest one, so she'd cuddle us up. But I would I remember getting these knots in my stomach. You know what I mean? And I learned how not to cry, because to my parents that was weakness. And it's kind of weird, because even now my kids try to scare me sometimes, and I just kind of like look at them and they go, "Don't you get scared?" It's not that I don't get scared. I feel it in my stomach. But it was something that I learned to do when I was a little boy, because it was, like I said, it was weakness. And one time I remember my dad and my mom getting into an argument. I was in my room. My sister was in her room, and I was right next to the stairways. And my dad and my mom are arguing. They're upstairs also, and there's like a little foyer right there with them. And as they're arguing, I remember seeing my dad throw my mom down the stairs. And I remember my mom flying down the stairs. I mean, you know, everything turns into like a slow motion kind of thing. And as she's going down the stairs, her arm went into the rail. And as her arm went into the rail, I started to see her arm break into little pieces, you know. And as she hits the bottom, so there's 2 sets of stairs and a little foyer on the bottom. She hits the bottom, and I remember looking at her, and what it reminded me of was like one of those Raggedy Ann dolls.
Yeah.
She was all broken up, and you know, I'm thinking he killed her, you know. And so, you know, my sister comes out, we're all screaming, and my dad's trying to convince us, you've seen her, she slipped, right? You know.
Wow.
And you know, that was the kind of stuff. So, and we couldn't really say anything, because if we did, we'd get in trouble.
Was he abusive to you guys too?
My dad? Yeah, he was abusive. My dad was more like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, you know. There was times that when he was sobered, it was a 50-50. He's pretty, he tells us he loved us. He tried to do things with us, but how can I say? There was just a lot of like I said, he was like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, because he had gone through so much he didn't have a father in his home. His dad, his mom and his dad had divorced at a very young age and stuff. So he was full of anger, bitterness. He blamed the world for everything. You know what I mean? A lot of what I did because I learned it from him, you know? And my mom was very bitter because her, you know, she had grown up in a big family too, and they were very abusive, you know what I mean? And so
it's just a way of life for them.
It was just, to them, it was normal, you know. Yeah. Now I get it. Now I look at it and I say, well, no wonder they didn't know how to say I love you or how to show any kind of affection. It was never shown to them. But my mom was, you know, she was just as bad as my dad, you know. I remember another time when my mom and my dad were arguing, and we were upstairs also. There's a bathroom there. My dad and my mom go into the bathroom, and I could hear them arguing. And my mom pulls out a gun to shoot my dad inside the bathroom. And my dad grabs the gun with his hand, so she shoots him in the hand. Wow. You know? And so they were just as violent. It didn't matter, you know what I mean? It was just you know, you were lucky if nothing happened. So if there was, you know, drinking every day. My mom drank every day. My dad was a weekend drinker. My dad's, you could tell my dad was wanting to drink because he'd get in this grouchy mood. You know what I mean? And it was a trip, because I could look at my dad and I tell him, "You feel like drinking, huh?" No, you know what I mean? And you're just like your mother, and that's what it was. And see, and that's one of the other things. My dad, you know, he would always tell me, "You're just like your mother. You're just like this." So he had that against me. And then my mom would say, "You're just like your father." You know, so I'm caught in the middle. You know what I mean? I'm caught in the middle. So, and they love my dad and my mom love my sister. They're real hard on her. She went through a lot of stuff too. I remember things she went through, but it's their first daughter. You know, they love her. You know, they're going to take care of her. You know, it's their baby girl. And then my little brother, he was a baby, so they're going to take care of him because he was the baby. Mm-hmm. But I'm in the middle. So it's not really like, well, we don't really have to like this guy. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. You know, it doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? You know, what he thinks about us, you know.
Hey, Pastor, what was your, and I don't know if you can answer this question, but what was your process of thought as a child going through this? Was there any process of thought, or was it just, that's just, it is what it is? Or was there this thought of like, why is this happening? Does it have to be this way? Will this ever end? Or was it just, this is just my life?
Well, you know, to me, you know, it was what it was, but at the same time, you want something different. You know what I mean? You know, even though we lived in the projects and 99% of the kids that lived in the projects had the same kind of lifestyle, every once in a while you'd see a happy family. You know what I mean? And that's who you wanted to be. You wanted part of that happy family.
Well, I think that's a common thing with gangs, right? As a lot of these people, they grow up in the same household you're talking about, and so they find that family unit with the gangs, and that's
exactly, and that's what everybody does. You know, we're a family. We people join gangs because that's the only family they know. You know,
Yeah. So, I mean, knowing kind of where your testimony is going, I mean, you can tell from the story of your childhood how it desensitized you to violence, right? And how, you know, you grew up later in the gang life doing the things that you did, you know, based on your environment as a child, right? That just shows, with all our testimonies, it's interesting just to kind of analyze everybody's childhood, because that's really what shapes them on who they are and the decisions they make as teenagers and stuff. So obviously this had a huge impact on who you became.
Yes.
Right. The hopelessness you felt by everybody just kind of berating you with violence and words. And, you know, you preached a good sermon last night about the power of words. Right. And so that obviously plays a huge part. Right. I mean,
Yes.
I'm sure you attribute your home life with your parents is basically why you became who you became, right?
Of course, and that's what ended up happening. You know, you become hard. You know, growing up as a child, like I said last night, you know, I was called names. You know, if I cried, I was called weak. You know, I was called a sissy. You know, and so that kind of, every time they would say stuff like that, it would make me angry. It would make me hate them even more. You know what I'm saying? Because it just, I really didn't know what love was. You know. I've never really had the understanding of what true love was. And so, you know, and then these are the people that are supposed to protect you. These are the people that are supposed to love you, and, you know, and they weren't loving you. You know, you had more of a chance getting, you know, something happening to you at home than out in the streets, you know? And so, like I said, these are the people that I depended on, but they weren't there for me. So the only thing that I could do is go into the streets. You know, and you know, and because of the people that they would bring into the home, like, you know, I was talking about being molested, you know, and part of that, I when I was molested the very first time, I was molested by a woman, and I couldn't see, you know, I mean, you know, you're a child, you're 7 years old, what you know, but it feels like love. You understand?
Yeah.
So then, as time goes by, you know, I get molested again, and this time it's from a guy. But at the same time, now at this point of my life, I'm starting to think, okay, am I a queer? Am I a man? Because all this stuff runs through your mind, you know what I mean? So in my mind, I said, no, I'm going to show them that I'm not a queer. I'm going to show them that I'm a man. So through the process of that, I became very hateful, very bitter. You know, I started to do things that I wouldn't normally do. So now, by the from the age of 17, I mean, from the age of 7 to the age of 12, my life just turned around completely around. You know, I started playing around with wanting to be a gang member, you know, wanting to be different, wanting to fit in, you know what I mean? Wanting to show my parents that I wasn't weak, that I was strong, you know? And so I started to do things that I wouldn't normally do, you know, because before I was afraid. You know, I wouldn't take something that didn't belong to me. You know, I wouldn't do, I didn't, you know, do drugs or drink or whatever. And by the time I was 12 years old, I'm already drinking. I'm already getting high, you know. And in my mind, because I have to grow up, you know. So in those 5 years of my life, I had no choice but to grow up.
Pastor, if I could interject something here real quick, Pastor, and I'm trying not to interrupt you because I want you to say your story, but there's some things that I want to interject in there. Like, so the issue with molestation and stuff from in your life, it proves the importance of why. I mean, you know, I'm sure you can attest to the reason why it happens was because your parents were being careless.
Yes.
You're a child. You're supposed to be protected. Your parents are being careless because of drugs, alcohol, whatever it is that's going on. They're bringing these people into the house. I'm pretty sure these are the people that they know or that they party with, and it proves very clearly and very powerfully the importance of why it's, you know, Christ, salvation, all these things, why we need to be sober-minded, why we have to live right. And but the other thing about this, Pastor, is, you know, you're saying you got molested twice, or you got molested by these people, and you're a child. But the thing about it is, once you've been molested like that, you're no longer a child. You are a child in age or maybe in physicality, but in the spiritual aspect of it, the mentality aspect, they strip the innocence from you.
Of course, they've taken all that away from you. I think I was sharing with you the other day. When I had been molested, your mind starts thinking different. And I remember my sister had this doll, this big old doll, and my mom comes in the room and I'm touching the doll. You know what I mean? And my mom starts to blame me. You're dirty, you're nasty, you're no good. I've just been molested. You know what I mean? This is something new to me. This is something that was imparted into me, and this was a babysitter that was supposed to be taking care of us, and you brought her into the house, and this is what she did, and you know what I'm saying? And so, but now the tables have been turned.
Yep.
Now I'm the bad person. The person that did that to me isn't the bad person. I'm the bad person.
And that always seems to be the common response. And like in my dealings as a pastor with people that have been through molestation, it always seems like the parents always blame the victim.
Yes. And it happens all the time. And so then as they blame you, then you start very self-low esteem. You know what I'm saying? I'm not worthy. I'm not good for nothing. I'm this, I'm that. And I didn't grow up in any kind of a religious home. You know what I'm saying? The only time I remember my mom doing Lent, she'd stop drinking for 40 days. You know what I'm saying? But on the 40th day, watch out because the cops were coming. You know what I mean? But that was the only thing I knew. I knew that we passed by the Catholic church and do the sign of the cross, and that was about it. So I had no relationship with God. I didn't know God. I didn't know anything about God, and so all I'm doing is what's being taught. And at that point, what's being taught isn't good.
Yeah.
So my mind, I have a perverted mind. Now there's another thing that you need to understand. In those days, there was a lot of Mexican movies. I don't know if you can relate to that. There were a lot of Mexican movies. There was a movie called La Pulqueria, and La Pulqueria 1 and 2. It was almost like the Halloween, you know what I mean? There was so many of them. But they would show nudity, they would show, perversion, and it was normal. It was normal. Yep. So in the Mexican homes, these things were normal.
Yep.
So what that was doing to me, it was just increasing the way I thought. You know what I'm saying? Just making it worse. It wasn't because now I'm not looking at women the way I should, but and now I have a misunderstanding of what love and lust is.
Correct.
That's the catch right there. So excuse me. That's why we live in a world now that people misunderstand love and lust, And so from that moment on, I wasn't thinking like a child, I wasn't the kind of guy. It's not that I didn't know how to ride a bike, but I'd rather drive a car than ride a bike. You know what I mean? I'd rather be with a woman than be with my friends playing around. It was, that's an age that you should be playing marbles and you should be riding your bikes and you should be doing all that kind of stuff. That wasn't my thing. I'd go to the movies and it's a spirit. I'm gonna tell you, it's a spirit. It's a demon spirit because I'm 12 years old, right? And I would go to these movies. I'm the youngest one of all my homeboys in the same gang. And we would go to the movies together and we'd meet all these girls that were already 17, 18, and I'm 12 years old. And I'd hook up with these girls because it's a spirit. Yeah. You know what I mean? It was this, I was no longer a little boy. I didn't act like a little boy. Like you said, I didn't have no peach fuzz. I didn't, I didn't even know what that was, you know what I'm saying? But I was hooking up with these girls. And I'd go home. I remember going home, I was already dressing up with the cholo, I had my derby on and I had my flannels and my dickies, and I'd come home and I'd be high, I had my little earring with my little cross on my earring, and I'd walk into the house, I'd all full of hickeys, and my mom wouldn't tell me anything. They'd give me a hard time, mess around, but there was really no any kind of correction and say, well, you shouldn't be doing this. You're just a little boy. Excuse me. It just became normal. Yeah. It became normal. So, anything that I did, I was at the point where my mom wouldn't really tell me anything. My dad wouldn't tell me anything. So my dad and my dad had gone to prison because he was out there looking for my mom while she was cheating. So my dad had gone to prison. That time that he had gone to prison, I just went crazy, you know.
So there was the molestations, all this stuff that happens to you. Then in the midst of that, or because of that, then drugs get introduced, and then the gangs come from that. Or how did it manifest from a child molestation, and then drugs, and then outward into the streets, and then into getting into a gang?
Well, the thing was that by this time I started drinking when I was 11 years old. You know, my mom had no issue with that. She had no problem with that. You know, my mom came from a very small town in Mexico, and so to them it was normal if a kid drank or if he smoked or whatever. So I'd sit outside with my mom and drink a beer, smoke a cigarette, And so from there, hey man, hang out with my friends, and it's like, hey man, hit this, And so we would start to see the other kids in the projects that had parents that were old pachucos, you know what I mean? So they were already gang members, So they had grown into they were born into a family of gang members. So we started our own little clique. We started our own little gang. There was a bunch of us, so we started our own little gang for we can, protect each other, And before you know it, it's like boom, boom, boom. You know what I mean? We start doing everything everybody else is doing. We're stealing, we're doing drugs, we're selling drugs. I remember we'd put our change together. We'd go across the street and we'd cook a little carne asada. We're a bunch of kids cooking a little carne asada. We'd get somebody to buy us a bottle of Thunderbird, and we'd all take a swig, and eat this food because we had nothing at home. It didn't matter if we came home or if we didn't come home. So it just started getting, we started to see, to us it was a benefit because we were like meeting girls. So in the process of meeting girls, you felt loved, you know what I'm saying? And part of beating people up from other neighborhoods, your homeboys would, hey man, all right, bro. The adrenaline, oh man, you did good,
So it was you're looking for love, you're looking for affirmation, things that you should be getting from your parents or from the home. It's not there, so it's projected outwardly, and it's misconstrued. But it's the love, the lack of love that everybody's always looking for, the lack of affection, the lack of affirmation that they're searching for in their lives, and you find that in the streets.
Yeah, you find it, but it's warped.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? It's not normal.
Correct.
It's totally warped because even your own homeboys are backstabbing you, and if they're hanging around with somebody that they look up to, you know what I mean, and you're there, well, let's pick on him. You know what I mean? Let's pick on him. Let's beat him up. Let's do this to him for they can feel more loved because they feel rejected too.
Correct.
Because everybody there is rejected.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be loved, just that nobody has an understanding of what love is.
Yeah.
Because nobody's been taught love. Not even in their own homes, they haven't been taught love. Their parents weren't taught love. So how can they be taught love? You know what I mean? So we're out there looking for love in all the wrong places, but yet, we can't find it. There's that void inside of us, and we're doing whatever it takes. So if I have to hurt someone for someone to like me, that like feels like love, then I'm going to do what I have to do. If I have to steal something that doesn't belong to me just so I could feel loved, then I'm going to do that. You know what I'm saying? And so that's why I really believe that's why so many of these guys get into so much trouble, and young ladies get into so much trouble because they're looking for love. You got young ladies that are having kids from 2-3 different guys. Why? Because they're looking for love, because there's a void there. And most of these people you talk to them, especially people that came out of the same kind of lifestyle, they've gotten molested. And so, like I said, you're looking for love. You can't, you don't even have an understanding of what love is.
Yeah. So, sorry, go ahead, Daniel.
No, so, it's a skewed perspective. One of the common themes amongst our guests is molestation, abuse as a young child. And it's crazy how much it's out there. So I can see that, but I just had a quick question on, so during this era, what era were you gangbanging? Was it in the 80s, 90s?
It was in the late 70s already.
Late 70s?
Late
oh,
70s.
Wow, okay. So you were like early days of
the
street gangs.
Yeah, I was born in '66. So by the time 1977, I was already running around the streets.
Hey, Pastor, and when you were talking about you said you started this little gang. Was that a Sureño gang, or was that just a little gang and then it manifested into a Sureño gang?
The Sureño, like I said, the Sureño comes, Southern United Raza. We're a bunch of people that come from Southern California. So, our mentality wasn't even there because we didn't even, it wasn't a thing to us yet. We were too young to even understand what that was. You know what I mean? So we never really.
But even that gang aspect of it was still young too?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because we had just started this. So, a lot of things, people don't really understand that, you had your pachucos before you had your cholos. You know what I'm saying? The gangs didn't really start kicking. You had when the pachucos came out, you started having little gangs here and there, but they didn't really start to come out until almost the early 70s.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Maybe late 60s, but in the early 70s, everything started to blow up. And so even though, now we're in 2023, if there's so much stuff that has changed even through the gangs, everything that happened was all that gangs, and I mean, there's a lot of it still going on. But what I'm saying is the big boom was like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, you know what I mean? And then the late 90s, it kind of started dying out, in those times, you wanted to join a gang, you were getting jumped into a gang. I'm sure they're still probably doing the same thing now, initiations, they have it now, whatever. But, back then we were getting jumped into gangs, so you'd have to get jumped in by some guys. They'd kick you around for a little bit, smack you around, and then they'd pick you up, shake you off, and give you a beer. Then, as time goes by, now, I started hearing different stuff, but it's just kind of like everything changes, even the way of thinking changes. There's, because even though we were gang members and we had grown out in the streets, we still had certain values. You know what I'm saying? We respected our elders. We respected, even my mom, I could stand in front of my mom. My mom would stand there and slap me and slap me and slap me, and I wouldn't raise my hands at her. And it wasn't because I couldn't stop her. It was just a sense of respect. You always respect your mother. Yeah. You know what I mean? And the same thing with my dad. But with my dad, it was a little bit more different because with my dad, it was that, I loved him. And I really, I would walk up to him, I'd hug him, and I'd kiss him, because I loved my dad. When I was real little, I was real close to my dad. And but it had gotten to the point where he had become so abusive that I have fought him a couple of times, and at one point I had to tell him that if he touched me, I'd kill him, because it was just, it was totally different, and so with all the gangs and everything, we were just trying to fit in. I really believe that, everybody that was there, it blows my mind when I hear people, oh, he's just a wannabe. You need to be careful with that wannabe, because that wannabe will eventually become somebody later on. Yeah. Because everybody's a wannabe at the beginning. Yeah. And we want to be loved. That's really where it's at. And because we want to be loved, we're willing to do whatever it takes to be loved.
So, yeah, because that's very true, because that wannabe, in his search and in his great desire for that love that's lacking, that's missing, there's no telling what that wannabe will do to be what he's looking for.
Oh, yeah, and it's true. And, I never looked at myself as anybody important. You got to understand, I was just a kid. I didn't have brothers to back me up. I didn't have nobody to back me up, cousins, and say, excuse me, my uncles were ex-gang members, or I had nobody. I was like the first gang member in my family. So, I never thought of myself as somebody that people would respect, people would fear, And because I was the youngest one, I was the youngest one of them all, I never thought that I had made an impact. I remember years ago I had gone to Virginia to go preach for Carlos Morales. And while we were at a fellowship, I got a phone call from a homeboy of mine. They called him Pops. And I don't even know how he got a hold of me. But when we're at that fellowship, he calls me, and I start talking to him, and he's like, and the first thing that comes out of his mouth, he's like, wow, man. You sound like you're a man, I'm used to talking to the young kid, you sound like a man. And he goes, I called you to ask you for permission to use your life in a movie that we're thinking about making. And so he sent me some pictures of some movie stars. I've seen them, but I don't really know who they are. And he goes, And then, so I said, yeah, do whatever you want, and then he starts telling me, do you understand that when you left, everything went crazy? See, I had never seen myself as anybody. Because all my life, I have been seen as a nobody. And so he says to me, when you left, man, he says, I got shot like 16 times. And another guy got shot. And he starts telling me all this stuff. He goes, it all happened after you left. It was all because of the incident that happened at your house. And, I thank God that, when he said that to me, I was already saved. I was already pastoring. Because I really think that if he would have said that to me when I was living in the world, I just would have got it and ran with it. Mm-hmm.
So what was, do you mind talking about that incident?
Yeah, that happened.
Well, real quick, Daniel, if you don't mind me asking, Pastor, so you had mentioned, I want you to talk about that incident, but I was trying to find a space to come in here. You had mentioned that when you were a little kid and you were in the gang, you were so crazy out there that they greenlit you. Yep. Can you talk about that before you talk about the incident?
Okay, well, it happened in two different situations. See, when I was 12 years old, we had the guys a bunch of us had gotten together. And we had, started a little clique. I can't even remember the name of it. So, when we started this little clique, we were looking. It's like you're looking where you're gonna fit in. You know what I mean? You're just starting something, but you want to fit in somewhere. And so, in the process of wanting to fit in, one of the families that lived there, there were actually, it was two families, but they were related. They had moved to South LA. Now, I grew up after Compton. I grew up in Harbor City, which is by Long Beach and San Pedro area. So when they moved to the LA area down, so now it's all LA County, even where I'm at, but this is now LA, like downtown LA kind of. And these guys got introduced to a different gang, and it was called South Los. It's South LA. It was on 155th. And so it's like 100. I lived on 255th, so it's about 100 blocks away, and blocks out there are humongous. When they got jumped into this gang, we got introduced to that gang. So we started to claim the gang. We started to tag up the gang, you know what I mean, in a neighborhood that was against, you know what I mean, they were rival gangs. They just didn't get along. Sorry. By the time I was, almost 13, they had come to the house to kill me, the guys from Harbor City, from my neighborhood that I lived in, because of that. There was a guy named Casper that every time he'd see me, he would tell me that he was going to kill me, And so at that moment in my life, I shared with you that my dad was in prison. My dad had gotten out of prison. And when my dad got out of prison, he came home, he had some money, he bought me some shoes, bought some stuff for me and my brother, my sister. My dad took off. Him and my mom were no longer together. And he took off to Douglas, Arizona. And I was being threatened so many times. I was being jumped. I had been beaten up by these gang members in Harbor City. So many things had happened that at that point in my life, one day we got this guy drunk. Now, I'm already living with a woman, okay? So she's, I'm going to be 13. She's already 17. She's almost an adult. She's also a gang member from Barrio Avenues, which is a different gang. So my brother-in-law is from Tortilla Flats. My sister claims Tortilla Flats. My brother is one of the little right around Harbor City Pee-wees, So we end up getting this guy drunk. It was a friend of my dad's. And we end up leaving to Douglas because they're trying to kill me. And so we're out there for a couple of years, living with this woman. It was just amazing because people would see her and they go, "Is that your little brother?" And she'd go, "No, that's my man." You know what I mean? And they would look at her like, "What the heck?" Wow. But like I said, my mind was no longer the mind of a child.
Yep.
In my mind, I was a man.
Yep.
And I mean, you gotta understand. I bought a car at the age of 13. And so I'm working out. I can't even get a job because I'm so little. I'm so young. I'm a tiny little guy, And it was funny because at that time they used to call me Little One because I was like short, I was like 4'8". Oh wow! I was real little. I was just a kid, and hadn't even gone through puberty yet. You know what I mean?
Wow!
And I'm working out in the fields. I remember me and my brother-in-law would wake up at 2:00 in the morning, wait by a light pole for the bus that would pass by the border and pick up all the illegals while they were jumping the fence. And then they would come and pick us up and then take us to Rodeo, New Mexico. And we'd be out there working in the fields.
Oh, wow.
And we'd be picking chilies and watermelon. Man, I remember crying, brother. I'd get there, it was dark. I'd leave there, it was dark.
Wow.
You know what I mean? We were just like working now. And it was just enough for us to live on, to rent a place together and whatever. And so I'm out there for a couple of years, and in the process of being out there, my mom's dad died. And so I call my mom to tell her that her dad died. Now listen to this. I haven't spoken to my mom for 2 years. So now I went from 4'8" to where I'm at right now, which is 5'8". You know what I mean? Grew a whole foot there, right? Not much, but for me it was a lot, My voice has changed. I call her, and she goes, "Who is this?" And I said, "This is your son." She goes, "You're not my son." She's used to hearing this little boy's voice. And I said, "No, this is your son. It's me, Frankie." And so then I started to tell her that her dad passed away. By this time, me and the young lady that I was with, we had split up and stuff. And she had became a dispatcher for the police department. And so we had split up. And my mom comes to Arizona because across the border of Douglas, that's her family's from Sonora. She goes to go to her dad's funeral. When she comes back, she comes and tells me that everything's going to be okay, that things are going to be different, that, she's not going to put other guys before me, which is a lie. But, I figure, oh, well, let's go. So I end up going back to California. My mom ends up hooking up with this guy. And when she hooks up with him, this guy starts to show me, because I was so rowdy and so crazy, the guy likes it because he's the same kind of person. He grew up in a home where his brother was murdered. He tried to kill the guys that killed his brother was like his dad, and they slit his throat from end to end. He had a cut from one end to the other. So he had already murdered about 4 different guys that had killed his brother. Wow. So this guy, he showed me love, and he liked my craziness. He even tried to get crazy with me a couple of times, and I went at it with him, and he would trip out on me like, this kid is crazy, but he liked that in me. So he would hug me. He would, that was love to me. That was love, He would show me how to use a weapon. He showed me how to throw knives. This guy, he was a violent guy, and that's what he showed me how, he showed me how to do stuff. And so I was like, man, this guy really likes me, and he would introduce me as his son, So I'm grabbing a hold of all this, It's like, man, I've never felt this before.
Yeah. And
so as time goes by now, you got to understand, now I come back to Harbor City. And when I came back to Harbor City, all my friends that were Sureño, were from South Los, have now become gang members from Harbor City. And they start to explain to me, bro, you don't have to be from South Los. You don't have to claim South Los. You grew up here. This is your hood. This is what you claim. And so it took a little bit of convincing, you know what I mean? It took a while to convince me, and I would start hanging around with them. But every time I would hang around with them, some of the guys would start saying stupid stuff like, hey, man, I think this dude's from another neighborhood, bro. You know what I mean? Just to start problems. And so the older guys would tell me, hey, Frank, you want to get jumped in? Now, I had never been jumped into the other gang. We were just claiming it. And so eventually they convinced me. And I get jumped into the gang. And so when I get jumped into this gang, this friend of ours, a friend of the family's, we knew his mother. His mother was the only thing we knew as a grandmother at the time because she lived next door to us for years. And her son was one of the main guys in the neighborhood in Harbor City. At that time, I'm 15, so he had taken care of me when I was younger. Even when I was younger, if somebody tried to get close to me, he would jump in and tell them to leave me alone. They respected him because he was well known. This guy's a humongous guy. Looked like the guy that used to play the Incredible Hulk. I mean, this guy was locked up so many times. He was like big old buff guy, And so, I when I get jumped into this neighborhood, he takes me under his wing. And so we'd go places, and all these gang members would be hanging out, from the same gang, and he'd put them to the test. Hey, man, who's willing to do this and this and this? And these guys, the youngsters are like, me, man, I'll do it. And they go, ain't none of you guys got the guts. I says, Termite will do it for me, because that's what they used to call me, And so these guys started getting bitter towards me, started getting hateful towards me, because it's like this guy that everybody looks up to, the only person that he counts on is me, And so they're like, why? We grew up here. We're from here. We all our lives we've been from here, but now you're counting on this guy. Mm-hmm. And so every time I'd go home, my stepfather would be standing by the door drinking. He'd wear a cowboy hat. He had cowboy boots. He'd wear Levi's. He'd always wear like a muscle shirt, and he was a pretty stocky dude too, And my homeboy would always tell me, hey, bro, does he mess with you? I tell him, nah, he doesn't mess with me. He goes, if he ever messes with you, bro, you let me know. He just didn't like him. Mm-hmm. And so this went on and on and on and on. And so one day I came home, and when I came home, my stepdad was standing at the front door. And he calls me and he says, hey, Frank, he goes, have you seen George? Which was that friend of mine. And I said, no, I haven't seen him. And then he explains to me that they had gotten into a fight. I guess he was at the gas station pumping gas. And, back in the day, the license plate, behind the license plate, he's on his, squatted down putting gas. And he heard somebody say, hey. He looked up. He punched him in the face and knocked him out. You know what I mean? Took his hat. And he goes, so he's telling me what had happened. And he goes, I bought a new hat. I wanted to see if he likes this one. He goes, so he goes, if you see him, let him know. And I said, what's going on? No. I said, why don't you guys just fight toe to toe, And he goes, no. He goes, I got this hat for him. So I want to know if he likes it. He goes, and then I got something else that I want him to hold for me. And he pulls out a gun. So I just figured, whatever, nothing's going to happen. And so I go upstairs to my room, and I'm probably there for a couple of hours. And suddenly I hear arguing. And my sister calls me, and she says, Frank, you need to come down here. She goes, Angel, which is my stepdad, he says, and George are arguing. She goes, you need to come down. So I come running down the stairs, and when I go running down the stairs, I'm coming right behind my stepfather. And my homeboy's right outside the door, and so there's these steps going down, and he's standing at the front door. As I get to the back of my stepfather had already pulled out the gun, but he was covering it with the door, so he hadn't seen it. And he was actually setting it on the table. He was getting ready to set it on the table, And as he was setting it on the table, my homeboy had a sarape over him, and he threw the sarape up in the air. And when he threw it up, he pulled up a sawed-off. And it wasn't, your typical sawed-off shotgun. It was a sawed-off 22. That's what it was. And when he pulled, what happened was he beat him to the punch. He pulled the trigger, but the bullet got jammed. So when he threw the sarape and picked it up, my stepfather just automatically grabbed the gun and started to unload. So I'm standing behind him as he's shooting at him. And so my homeboy has pants on, huaraches, no shirt on, and I could actually see the bullets going in and out of his body. And, everything at that moment goes into like a slow motion. Like all you hear, you hear this noise, and he's turning around in circles, man. It's something like a movie. He's turning around in circles and with the rifle in his hand still, but the rifle's pointing down, and he's unloading. He unloaded the whole clip on him. And I remember he hits the ground, and the first thing that comes into my mind is to give my stepdad the keys to the car. I said, you got to leave, bro. I said, because if you don't, they're going to kill you. He gets in the car and he takes off, and I hold this man in my arms. I'm calling my dad. I said, Dad, Angel just killed George. At that time, my dad's now living in Torrance, which is another city down from where we're at. I called 911, and so the cops come, and I'm holding them in my arms. The first thing they do is they grab me, they slam me on the floor, they handcuff me, and they take me in. And they're questioning me because obviously they think I have something to do with this. And so through the process of all this, gang members start to come. Now, you got to understand, I lived right on PCH, which is a big highway, and Vermont. So it's like the two of the big main streets in L.A. This street is closed off all the way from PCH to Vermont. There's gang members everywhere. There's gang members that aren't even from that that are from that neighborhood but don't even live in that neighborhood that are there. So they end up taking me in, and as they're questioning me, I'm, like I said, I'm full of blood, and I go in there and I'm washing up, and they're questioning me. They're asking me all these questions, and I'm talking about, I had nothing to do with this. And so they end up taking me back, but as they're taking me back, the detective tells me, he says, be careful, man, because they're going to try and kill you, bro. That's the word. Because the cops made it seem like I had something to do with it, And so as they take me back, I get off the police car, and the cop just walks away from me. He leaves me there. And so these homeboys of mine come up to me, about 25 of them come up to me, and one of the older guys comes and whispers in my ear, and he says, be careful, because they're going to try and kill you, And so they go, hey, come on, turn right, let's go get him, and you know where he's at? I said, well, he's up in Tortilla Flats. You guys want to go to Tortilla Flats and go get him? That's on you guys, And so, but they go, no, we want you to come. See, but I already knew what they were going to do. I already knew the plan. So we get them in the car, we'll go to where they're at, and we'll just shoot him and dump him out of the car. I knew because I'd seen it happen so many times. You know what I mean? That's I knew exactly what's going to happen. I said, nah, I'm not going with you. You go. Mm-hmm. And then one of the guys there said, he goes, you know what? Why do we have to go anywhere, bro? Let's just do it here. Now, there's cops everywhere there, bro. There's cops, there's detectives, there's all kinds of stuff going on. These guys aren't scared of the police. They're not scared of nothing. And so the guy pulls the gun out. And so as he pulls the gun out, I'm running through the crowd. Now, my uncles are there. My dad's not even there yet. My uncles are there, and their wives are there. And as I'm running through the crowd, I'm telling my uncles, watch my back, bro. Just watch my back. All you got to do is get in the way. Just watch my back. And one of my uncles said to me, he says, that's what you wanted. That's what you get. Wow. And so one of my uncles, his girlfriend grabbed me and leaned at me against the car and acted like she was kissing me. And my dad pulls up. And as my dad pulls up, I jump into the car, and my dad takes off, and they start shooting at the car. My mother shows up because she's out drinking about 2 o'clock in the morning, and she had seen the body laying there. Now, at this point, he's dead. They covered up the body. And 2 weeks prior to that, my mom didn't want me to go outside because my mom was into witchcraft. And the witch told her not to let me out of the house because they were going to kill me. That's what she told her. And so when my mom gets to the house, she sees the body laying in the front door, and she starts to call out my name. When she starts to call out my name, she doesn't understand that she's making everybody think that I had something to do with the murder. See? So, we're gone, but they put a hit on me. The next day, I'm at my uncle's house in Compton, and my stepfather shows up. And he's like, "Hey, Frankie," and he goes to shake my hand, and I just look at him, and I'm like, "I'm not shaking your hand, bro. You just killed my friend, the only guy that took care of me." And so my mom ends up dressing him up. They actually dressed him up like a cholo. They put him on a Greyhound bus, and they sent him all the way to Arizona, over here to Arizona, ends up in Mexico. Nobody even knows where he's at. 3 days go by, and I end up here on August 4th in Arizona, August 4th of 1983. I can't go back home because they put a hit on me. The house is surrounded by gang members. It's the cops have to come and stay there while my mom's emptying out the house. Now, I didn't know anything else but that. That's all I knew, you know what I mean? And so my mom brings me to Arizona, but I don't want to be there. And so I'm going back at night, man. I would drive down there, go hang out with some of my homeboys, get drunk, party, whatever. But I'd have to leave before sunup, you know what I mean? Nobody would find out that I was there. Well, eventually, my stepfather ends up coming to Tucson from Mexico. And we're working out in the fields and the pecans. In Arizona, they got a lot of pecans, and we're picking pecans. That's where we're working at. That was our first job out there. We get paid one day. And so I used to smoke a lot of Sherm. And in Arizona, they didn't have Sherm back then. So I started sniffing paint. So I would sniff paint, a lot of paint. I go through about 6 cans of paint a day because I needed to make up for the PCP, And so we're outside the house, and I remember I'm huffing this paint, and I'm drinking, and my stepdad's next to me, and he's drinking. And I remember looking up, and I remember seeing this little light. I was like, man, that's a weird light. You know what I mean? And so I kept on staring at it. I was on a good buzz. And it was a helicopter. It was way, way up high. And I could see the glare of the light. But when they noticed that I noticed, they turned on the light. And from all around, there was cops coming our way. And it was a setup because there was detectives from California already here. So they get us, they handcuff us. I had ran to the door. I remember I ran to the door to go get into the house. And my dad shuts the door on me, and he says the same thing my uncle said. He goes, "That's what you wanted. That's what you get." And in my heart, up to this day, I really believe that my dad's the one that called the cops. Mm-hmm. And so they handcuff us and whatever. They end up taking us in. And they end up impounding the car, took my stepdad. They end up letting me go. But probably in the process of because I got then in that time I ended up getting married to my first wife. I was 17 years old. She was 16. I would go visit my dad, and the cops would show up looking for me, and I'd go out the back door and take off. And eventually they ended up catching up to me. And they said, we're going to send you to California. There's a trial going on, and you need to go. He goes, but the word is that they're going to kill you when you get there. He goes, so we're going to have you under protective custody. So we go down there, and I have cops sleeping in the rooms next to me. You know what I mean? Because they're going to come and kill me at the hotel. They're going to kill me at the courthouse. They're going to, you know what I mean? And they're trying to say that I handed my stepfather the gun, that I had, you know what I'm saying? I said I had nothing to do with this. I was just the wrong place at the wrong time. That's what it was. And so eventually my stepfather gets sentenced, I can't remember, like 20 years or something. And they end up, letting me go. They can't pin anything on me. I have nothing to do with this. But there's still a hit on me. They're still trying to kill me. They're still, trying to find out where I'm at. Every once in a while, somebody from Harbor City would show up to Tucson, and I'd be like, why are you here? So I'm always with the doubt, you know what I mean? Even though they were friends of mine that were close to me, I didn't trust anybody, you know what I mean? Because maybe their lives were in danger, and they were like, well, we'll take this guy out, you know what I mean? And so I didn't trust them. And, then, as time goes by, I'm living in Tucson, and before you know it, I'm running stuff in Tucson. I become a drug dealer. I'm doing whatever I have to do to survive, and I'm working, but I'm also selling drugs. I tried to be that that person that everybody wants to be. I wanted to have a lot of money in my pocket, but at the same time, I wanted to be that Robin Hood that could save everybody. I was buying people cars, I was paying their bills, I was buying their kids' diapers, I was filling up their refrigerators with food, and so people, they had that respect for me. People would come up to me and say, "Hey, man, I want to do this," and I would actually sit down, have a gathering, and tell them, "Look, bring your wife in here, let's talk." They'd bring their kid, their family, and they would be out having at the party while I'd sit down and talk to them and tell them, "Do you know what your husband asked me?" I said, "Yes, we need the money." So, well, if you get involved in this, there's no going back. If you snitch me off, I'll kill you. You know what I mean? But not only I'll kill you and your family, I'm not gonna have anybody come and look for me, 19 years, down the road. So people feared me because I wasn't the type of person that because of everything that I had gone through, I had became so hard that I had become the kind of person that if somebody said they were looking for me, I'd go kick their door down and drag them out of their house, because I wasn't going to wait for somebody. I wasn't going to live in fear.
Correct.
I wasn't going to live watching my back, which I did anyways, but I didn't want to do that. And so everybody knew the consequences of that. So, I did what I did. I did what I had to do to survive. And, I end up in 1990, I was at work. And when I was at work, a sheriff showed up, and he wanted to talk to me. So, I went up to him to go see what he wanted, and he asked me, he says, "Is Aida Romero your mom?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but your mother's been murdered."
Mm.
And it was kind of hard. You're kind of in denial. Like, my mom, what would she be involved in? You know what I mean? There's no reason that anybody would want to kill her. And so end up going to the police department. Some detectives came. They explained to me. We had her body shipped. I had traded a car that I had for some drugs. I had a car that I was fixing up for, little lowrider, all custom, and I traded it for a kilo of cocaine for I could sell it and make money to bury my mom. And had her body shipped to Tucson, and when we had her body shipped to Tucson, we had to go identify the body. I remember walking in there, and they had her laying on this metal table. They had shot half of her face off. And I remember looking at her from a distance. My dad had gone with me, and he started to yell at me and tell me go see your mother. And he started to push me. And as he started to push me that way, I remember I said to him, for the very first time, actually that was the second time, I said, if you ever push me like that again, I'll kill you. I identified her body, and we went through the funeral and everything, and I got ready to go to California because we needed to go pick up her stuff. And so my brother didn't want to go. He's the youngest one, and he wasn't little, but he was young. Still in high school, I believe. And my sister said, she goes, I'll go with you. And so at the end of it all, nobody went with me. They said, I had overheard them talking and said, just let Frankie go. Yeah, he don't have a heart. He has no feelings. And it wasn't that I didn't have any feelings. I had just become hard. I had become that person that they wanted me to be, And so I end up going to her house and picking up her stuff, and they had cleaned up all the major stuff, but they didn't clean everything up. And I remember cleaning pieces of her face off her mattress. And I remember I wanted to cry, but I had this knot in my throat. I just couldn't cry. I came back to Tucson, and I went on an alcohol drug binge for about 3 months. I looked like I was homeless because I just didn't care. I had lost hope, My mother had never told me that she loved me, and I always wanted to hear her say that. And when she died, I knew that I had lost all hope. I knew that I never hear her tell me she loved me. So growing up like that all my life, that's all I wanted to hear her say, that she loved me. And so I just became very bitter, more than what I already was. Hateful. I became more violent to the point that I didn't care if I died. I didn't care if I killed someone. It didn't matter to me anymore. Right after that, I had gotten into a argument with my brother-in-law, and I slit his throat 8 times. And I ended up in jail, and I remember being in jail and waking up and not knowing what happened. You know, because my mind was just warped. I was just messed up. I started, like I said, became more violent. Started shooting at people, getting into shootouts. I remember getting into this shootout one time. My wife was with me. By this time, I'm married to my wife, Roxy, now, and I told her to leave. And I had just shot at these guys at a gas station, and I knew they were going to come to the house, And as she starts to drive out, my dad's my watchman, He says to me, they're coming. I remember throwing my wife down to the ground. And the first thing I remember is she had my son, Anthony, in her arms. And as she hit the ground, I remember he looked at me. He's just a baby. He looked at me like, "What are you doing, Daddy?" That's what I got out of it. Like, what are you doing? Luckily, it wasn't them, and I get her in the car, and she drives out. And as soon as she drives out, the car pulls up. And I remember hiding behind a Blazer. And the only thing that was on my mind, it wasn't about them shooting at me. It wasn't what was going to happen and what the outcome, nothing. The only thing that mattered to me is that I didn't get hit in the face. See, because my mother had been shot in the face, and I didn't want to get shot in the face. That's the only thing that mattered. That was the only thing that was on my mind at that point. And I remember when their guns sounded empty. Click, click. I came out with a gun in each hand, and I ran up to the car, and I started to shoot inside the car. And I remember because they were young kids, they were young men. They were screaming, and they're going around in circles in the middle of the street, and I'm running with the car. My brother-in-law's with me. He's also shooting at the car. And they take off. No remorse, no fear, no nothing of the consequences. It didn't mean anything. Because at this time of my life, I was already numb. I didn't feel no pain. The only satisfaction is the craziest thing about it is that I would go and I'd get, I got tattoos on my stomach, on my back, and that was the only satisfaction I had, that I could feel something, I would get these tattoos because I could feel them cutting into my flesh, and it gave me a satisfaction. Then I became my dad. I would drink. I would get glasses, bottles of liquor. I have a scar on my head here somewhere from a bottle of liquor. I busted in and when I would bleed, it would show me that I was still alive. You know what I mean? I would look for that satisfaction because I felt numb. And nobody understood me. Nobody understood me. Nobody understood what I had gone through because, I had talked to people. I even went to the Catholic Church and talked to the priest one time. And I didn't even believe in all that, but I said, I'm going to go talk to somebody. Because I would try to kill myself. And couldn't even do that right, you know. I remember going into the Catholic Church and sitting down with the priest and telling him, you know, I just tried to shoot myself 3 different times, man. Every time I was going to pull the trigger, my nephew walked in, my niece walked in, my sister walked in. I said, what do? He says, well, I can't tell you what to do because if I do, we can get sued. I felt like grabbing him and pulling him over the counter. It's not what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear that there was some kind of hope.
Yeah.
You know, because I had lost all hope. You know, to me, there's like, at this point in my life, I was worried, like what you said right now. I was like, there's nothing else. This is who I am. I'm going to die like this. You know what I mean? There's no change. Nothing is going to get better. Nothing. This is what I deserve. You know. And my poor wife would just pray for me. And pray for me. And, you know, she wasn't a drinker. She wasn't a partier. She didn't do drugs. She didn't do all these things. So we were from 2 different worlds. She would talk to me and she'd tell me, babe, you can be a better person, you know. And I tell her, you don't know what I've done. You don't know what I've been through. How can you tell me I could be a better person? She told me, your mom loved you. I know she didn't. Your dad loved you. No, he didn't. And so in the process of that time of my life, you know, I had been with so many women already because I wanted to be loved. But it wasn't satisfying anymore. There was no love. There was just, I couldn't find love. So, you know, in 1995, I made a choice. I made a decision to take my life. And they had put me on, I had gone to go ask for help, and the counselors gave me a notebook and told me to write down everything I went through. Man, I didn't know how to spell, you know. Grabbed the notebook and threw it away, and I went to go see a doctor, and he put me on, I think it's Prozac, something like that, depression pills. I've always had high blood pressure, so they had me on this medication since I was like 20 years old. And I didn't know that I found out after I committed suicide. I took 150 Prozacs. They said that 5 of them should have killed me. When I got to the hospital, my heart stopped. And they were trying to revive me. My wife says that I was outside of the house, crawling, foaming at the mouth. Her and the neighbors put me in the car and she took me to the hospital. And she said that they were, you know, kept on trying to revive me. She said finally the doctor gave up. A nurse had walked in. She said, you can't give up. He has too many babies. These kids need their daddy. And I guess they gave me a shot of adrenaline or something, and then they shocked me. And my wife says that I sat up. I like kind of squatted on top of the bed. I grabbed the doctor from his throat, and I swung him over the bed. Said that another doctor came, and I grabbed him with my other hand and swung him over the bed. I went into a slight coma. And when I woke up, I was tied down like almost every 8 inches, man. I mean, I was tied down. Everything was far distance. But right before I woke up, I remember being in this dark, dark place. Not black, but dark. And I remember I could see myself. I was standing, I was in the hospital, I was standing there, and I was looking around, and everything was pitch dark. I would look up and it looked pitch dark. I looked down, it looked pitch dark. I looked to the sides and it was pitch dark. But I was lit up. I was lit up. Where I was lit up. There was this light around me for some reason. And when I woke up, my wife was laying right next to me. Her head was right on my shoulder. And I remember waking up and I was angry. And I started to yell at the nurse to come. My wife was yelling, "He's awake, he's awake." The nurse comes running in and doctors start coming in, and I remember telling the nurse, "Come here." And the nurse said, "Hell no. There's no way I'm getting close to you." She goes, "You're the devil." Two weeks later, I come out of the hospital with a walker and an oxygen tank. They said that the drugs had affected my lungs somehow, and they had affected my muscles, whatever it did, spaz out my muscles. I don't know what happened. And every day my wife would take me out for walks. Every day. But even then, it didn't matter. It didn't matter because my understanding of love was totally, totally different than hers. You know? My understanding of love was more sexual than anything else, you know? So that, to me, that wasn't love. And, you know, time goes by and I lose the walker, I lose the oxygen tank, and I go right back to being the person I was. No change. I'm still violent. I'm still a drunk. I'm still, you know, all that is still going on in my life. My wife, I'd be home and people would come to the house. Some of her family that were involved in the Catholic Church would come and try to tell me about God, but they were afraid of me. So even for them to talk to me, you know what I mean? They were afraid of me. They didn't know what to say. It's like they were like walking on eggshells. And so she had Mormons come. Mormons are funny, you know. They would come and they would, you know, read me stuff, and I didn't care. I'd feed them, you know. I'd feed them because, you know, they're like elders, you know, and they didn't have money. They would tell me all this stuff, so I'd feed them. I remember because it's the first time I seen somebody eat a taco with a fork, and you know, and I remember it got to the point where I told Roxy, "What do you want? What is it that you want?" "Well, I want you to change, Mom." I said, "All right, well." I go, "Let's go see what their baptisms are about." I knew that they were getting baptized that day, so I went to go see what it was about, right? So I figured, what the heck, I'll go. And if I got to get baptized in the Mormon church, I'll get baptized just so she could leave me alone, you know, because she just kept on pushing it. And so we went down there, and I remember we got into an argument in the parking lot at the Mormon church. So we ended up leaving. And we went back home and you know, just thought nothing of it, you know. You know, now she makes fun of me. She goes, "Can you imagine? You would have been Elder Frank, you know? You would have got a 10-speed and you would have been all right, your little tag." You know? And I was trying to do better. I was trying to stop doing drugs. So I worked at this company in the daytime doing tile, and after work, the guys would go to work, and they'd invite me to go do side jobs, but I didn't want to go because we'd get high, we'd do coke, we'd drink, you know. So my sister and her husband, they worked at a Burger King, so I said, "Why don't you give me a job at Burger King? I just need stuff to keep me going." It wasn't the money, it was just to keep me going for I could stop doing what I was doing. So I'd been working there for about a couple of months, and one day I called my wife. I said, just come get me. I said, I don't want to be here no more. And when she comes to pick me up, she shows me this flyer, right? And so I look at it, and the first thing that comes to my mind is Victory Outreach. You know, now I don't knock anybody, but the way I had grown up in California, you know, I had seen gang members that were in Victory Outreach that weren't really saved. You know what I mean? It wasn't like really, you know. So I never even wasted my time hearing them. I didn't want to, you know what I mean? Because I would always, I'd see the same person. They were still cholos. They were still smoking. They were still, you know what I mean? So it's like there's, you know, what do I want to do that for? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then so I tell her, I said, nah, I don't want to go. I said, it's Victory Outreach. And she's like, well, you know, me and the kids really want to go and blah, blah, blah. And again, it's funny because it was a gang play. And my wife's never been into gangs. It's like, it's, you know, it's not part of her life, but she wanted to go. We're getting closer to the house. I said, well, you know what, if you want to go, let's go. I said, but I'm not going to go listen to this play. I'll stay over here by the car and I'll smoke a couple of cigarettes and do whatever. So they go and they get, you know, they go up there to hear the drama. They I guess they prayed. I don't really know what happened. And this guy I remember comes up to me. He's a pastor now in the fellowship, and he goes, hey, bro, let me tell you about Jesus. I said, bro, you come and tell me about Jesus, I'm going to knock your teeth out. He's like, all right, bro, no problem. He walked away. Little Mexican guy comes up to me, starts talking to me about work. And so we start talking about work. And before you know it, this other guy comes and he starts talking about work. He goes, what kind of work you do, bro? And right when I was going to leave, he says to me, can I pray for you? I remember I turned around angry and I said, you want me to pray? And he says, no, I want to pray for you. Just knock yourself out. I figured, oh, well, you know what I mean? As long as I don't have to do it, I'm good. He prayed and I walked away. Probably a month goes by and this guy comes looking for me. Same guy that prayed for me comes looking for me. Now, I don't know how he found me. All I could assume is because of the cars I drove, he's seen my car and he found the car. And he says, hey, man, you know, I just came to see how you were doing and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, all right. So I figured I'd get rid of him. You know, every time he'd come, I'd smoke a joint in front of him, you know, blow the smoke his way. You know, he's a pastor in the fellowship too, and Alfredo Barron. And I would go out there with the beer in my hand. So he kept on doing this for a while. But every time he would leave, he'd go, can I pray for you? Go for it. Didn't do nothing the first time. You sure ain't going to do nothing the second time. You know what I mean? And so eventually he invites me to his house for a cookout. But the cookout was just the hook, you know. He says, but first we got to go to church, bro. I said, well, I don't know. I have to ask my wife because I don't think she really wants to go to your church, bro, because she's Catholic. You know? I asked my wife, and of course she says yes. So we end up going to church. And I remember walking into the church. Now, you got to understand, I had just came out on the cover of the newspaper, so everybody had seen me on the newspaper. There was a couple of people in the church that I had threatened to kill years ago. There was a guy that works for a paint shop that I had pulled everybody out of the paint shop. There's a Mako paint shop. I pulled everybody out, managers and everybody, and threatened to kill them if they didn't paint my car right the fourth time. Wow. And so the people are looking at me already, you know what I'm saying, different. I didn't want to sit down because every time I'd sit down, I'd have these crazy people praying for me, you know. I thought they were crazy. I didn't think I was crazy, you know. And so I would come into the church and I would cuss these people out. My wife would tell me, please don't do that. No, they're doing witchcraft. Especially when they're speaking in tongues, they trip me out.
Yeah.
Because, in our world, we think we hear chanting when we hear, the devil trying to mimic God. That allows fear into people when they really hears people speaking in tongues. Mm-hmm. And so that's what was happening. So I got to the point that if I would go to church with her, I wouldn't sit down. I would stand against the wall. And so one day I was outside my house and I was smoking a joint, and I remember yelling at God. I remember cussing God out. I remember calling him names. I remember saying, where were you when I was a child? Where were you when I was molested? Where were you? My mother got murdered. Where, everything that, we want to blame everything on God. And so at that point in my life, I just, I just wanted some answers. Why I was living the life I lived. Why my life was so messed up. And I remember the following day going to church. And I remember Pastor Marty Carnegie was preaching, and he would look my way, and he'd keep on preaching, and then he'd look at my way again, continue to preach. And I'm looking at him, and you got to understand, I have I have some kind of hatred towards black people because a black man had killed my mom. And even though one of my best friends is black, that's where I was, you know what I mean? And then I was like, what is he looking at? You know what I mean? Do I know him from somewhere? You know what I'm saying? I'm thinking all these crazy things. And then I remember him calling me out in the middle of a service. So he stops the service right in the middle, and I'm like, and he says, I have to do something now. And when he said that, he looks at me and he points at me and he says, you says, come here. And, I, in my mind, I don't care. I'm going to be cool. You know what I mean? I'm going to play it cool. I was stoned out of my mind. You know what I mean? So I was just kind of like, who's going to notice? Who's going to tell me anything? I don't care. I don't know these people, And I remember walking up to him. And I remember these were the words he said to me. He says, I'm going to tell you something. I don't know what it means. He says, but you know what it means. And God knows what it means. And so he leans over and he says something in my ear. I don't even know what he said. To this day, I don't remember. I wish I did. He said something in my ear. And when he said these words, I remember getting a flashback of all the bad things I had done. Like in a second, everything. And then I remember just standing back because it was like real quick, but everything was clear. And I remember looking at him, and then in my mind, I thought, bad high, because we're always looking for an excuse, God does things, and we're always looking for an excuse, so I'm looking for an excuse. And he says to me, the same way people follow you for the devil. Now, you got to understand, this man don't know me. He doesn't know people that follow me, but yet everywhere I'd go, I'd have 10, 12, 14 guys following me. He says, the same way people follow you for the devil, they're going to follow you for Jesus. And I started to laugh. He says, I don't think you understand. He says, but you have a calling to preach the gospel. Mm. And so I remember looking at him and I said, are you done? And I walked away. And he just laughed, Marty does that, he just laughs. I remember going back to that wall and standing against that wall. And as I was standing against that wall, he continued to preach. And, you think about it, why would he stop in the middle of a service? But it's because God had a plan, because at that moment when he started to preach, it's like all eyes went back to him, and everybody, that never happened. Like that little walk never happened. Like him telling me would never happen. I went back and I stood against the wall. And as I'm standing against the wall, now I'm talking to God. you know? And I started to laugh. I remember I started to laugh, and I remember telling God, I said, is that all you got? I said, is that all you got? I said, if you're the God that these people believe in, you will stop me from touching my wife, because I was very abusive. I said, you will stop me from using drugs. You will stop me from drinking. You will take all this bitterness, this hate out of my heart, because I don't want it anymore. And if you do, I will serve you for the rest of my life. And when I said those words, I remember something hitting me in the back of my knees, and I fell on the ground, and I started to worship God. At that moment, I remember everybody. I mean, I couldn't tell you how many people. I looked like I had the football. You know what I mean? Everybody's piled up praying for me, and I wept, and I wept until all that pain was gone. Until all that from when I was a little boy, 7 years old, was gone. And I got up from that place. I remember getting up, and I wasn't stoned anymore. I remember looking around, and everything looked so different, so beautiful. I remember I could see the colors of the flags. It looked so clear. I remember walking out the door with my wife and my kids, and it was nighttime, and I could hear birds chirping. I could see the trees moving. I mean, it was, and to me, even though I had been around all that, I had never seen it. I never paid attention to it. It never meant anything. But I knew that God had done something. I knew that there was something different, because I didn't feel all that pressure anymore. I didn't feel all that weight anymore. There was just something totally, totally, totally different. And I remember as we were walking out, I pulled my cigarettes out of my pocket, and I handed them to Roxy, and I said, I'm done. And she says, what do you mean you're done? I said, I'm done. I'm never going back. Now, I just prayed. I don't know. I just walked out of there. I just prayed. I don't. And I remember she started to laugh. Not of joy, but of doubt. And she says, okay, I'm put them away for you. That's what she said. I remember getting home, and I grabbed all my pipes. I grabbed all my cocaine, my weed. And I showed my kids. I said, this is what your daddy does. Because they had never seen me get high. And I remember, they're looking at me. They're little, they don't understand. But I knew that I needed to put myself in a place where I'd be accountable. And I broke these pipes. I started to step on the drugs and, throw them on the dirt and step on them. I remember going inside the house and grabbing my clothes. And I had, I've never been in prison in my life. But people had gone to prison, and they would come out and they'd say, here, Frank, I did this for you. And for some reason or another, God gave me an understanding that these things had a spirit behind it. I grabbed all my clothes and I started throwing it in the trash. I had a long ponytail all the way down to my waist because my mother got murdered. The only thing I believed in was the Virgin of Guadalupe. Because I'd grown up in L.A., I was Chicano, this is a thing, And I had made a promise to the Virgin, and I let my hair grow, and I remember I cut it off. And I went home, and I said, hey, babe, come here. She was taking the baby a bath, and I put it in her hands, and I would always tell her the day I cut my hair is the day I die. I committed suicide the year before. She's freaked out. She started crying, and she's thinking I'm going to kill myself. I said, no, the old me's gone. I'm done. She packed up and left. You know, I went to work, and I came home to an empty house. She thought that I was crazy. But, you know, I was a man of my word, and I made a commitment to God. I said, I'm going to serve you for the rest of my life. And so my wife wouldn't talk to me. She wouldn't answer my calls. And when she did, all we did was argue. So then I had gotten to the point in my life where I would, at that time, we had pagers, you know. I would disconnect the phone to the house, and I'd shut off my pager. That way I wouldn't respond to her calls, because all we were doing was arguing. And so it got to the point where I wasn't answering her calls. And I would come home from church, and there'd be a little note on the fence, and I'd look at it, and it'd be like, hi, I came to see you. You know what I mean? And then there was a couple of ladies in the church that Roxy had grown up with since they were little, and they were like, is that Roxy? Yeah. So when she had moved out, they would come and tell me, Roxy called me. She wanted to know if you were still in church. And so, you know, it just showed me that she still cared, you know. And I remember I didn't know anything about fasting. I tell everybody fasting to me was we didn't have anything to eat. We ran out of food stamps, you know what I mean? And I remember I asked a couple of questions, and people told me what needed to be done. And I remember fasting. I remember fasting my first day. I remember my second day, I speaking in tongues. All this at home, not even at church, just at home. They had already prayed for me at church, and I didn't even speaking in tongues there. But when I was at home, I'm speaking in tongues, and I'm laughing and crying, speaking in tongues. My kids are like, "What's wrong with you, Dad?" And they're laughing too. They didn't know if they should laugh or cry too. And because I had my 4 daughters with me. I said, "There's nothing wrong, baby." I was on the 3rd day. I remember praying, and I said, "Lord, if it's meant to be for me and my wife to be together, show me. Just give me a sign. Give me some kind of hope." It was a Wednesday night. I got there early, made sure that I got some prayer in, and when I walked in, I went to go put my Bible where I was going to sit, and the first thing I see is my wife with that friend of hers sitting in the front row. I remember I walked up to her, and as I was walking up to her, God was speaking to me, and he says, it's like God would tell me exactly what I needed to do. All you're going to do is walk up to her and kiss her on the forehead and walk away. He says, I need to work on her. And so I did. I was obedient. I remember asking her, and as time goes by, I asked her to come back home, and she said she wouldn't come back home because that house was demon-possessed. My roof caved in, big old storm, roof caved in. I was forced to move out. I had my 4 daughters. Nobody would help me because now I'm not a drug dealer. Now I have no more money. Now, you know what I mean? I'm not supplying the parties. My dad rejected me. My sister, everybody rejected me. And I moved into this guy's laundry room. He offered me a laundry room. It was a big laundry room. It was a laundry room. I remember putting a little bunk bed in there and a little futon, and my daughters and me would sleep on there. We had a little milk crate with a little black and white TV, and that's what we would watch. As time went by, one day I heard a knock at the door, and I answered the door. My wife was standing there with my other 3 kids at the time. And I said, what are you doing here? She says, I talked to Ed, which was the guy where I was staying at his house. She said, and I told him that I was going to come in and move in here with you. I said, you can't do that. I said, you have a family, you have a good home. I said, just stay with them. And she says, no, I'm coming to be with you. You know, she moved in with me, and we had nowhere to go. The guy that I was staying at his house, he had some girl he was sleeping around with from the church, and I had caught them in the act, but to me, it didn't matter because I didn't know nothing about, I didn't even know the Bible. I didn't know nothing about no fornication, no adultery. You know what I mean? So to me, it was normal. It was like, oh, just your girlfriend. You know what I mean? But he knew he was in the wrong, so he threw me out of his house. I asked my dad, I said, Dad, can I come and stay at one of your apartments? Because my dad owned an apartment complex. He says, you can stay for one night. You know, I'd supported all these people. I'd bought them cars. I paid their bills and filled up their refrigerators with food, and nobody could help me now. And that night, some lady called me that didn't even know me. She heard about me because of another guy that worked with me. And she says, come to my house. I went to her house, and she says, I have a house, but it's been abandoned. Go look at it and see if you want to move in there. I went down there to go look at it. The house had been abandoned. Cats were living in it. No windows. But I needed somewhere to go. I took it, ripped out the carpet, and put plastic on the windows, and got a little can of paint, and we would touch up little things just to make it look decent. As time went by, I started to tile the house and clean the backyard and find all the windows in the backyard and put the windows on, and it started to become home. And it didn't matter that we didn't have all the luxuries. I mean, we couldn't even turn on the utilities because so many people had lived there that the utilities had been changed so many times that they didn't even want to turn them on. We had to put like a $1,500 deposit. I didn't have that money. I fixed the house, and as I fixed it, the lady would come. That lady she goes, for 6 months, I'm not going to charge you no rent. Just fix the place, and then after that, we'll work it out. So I made the house look like a house. She says, you do tile, Frank? I said, yes. She goes, come and tile my house. I remember after I had finished with her house, some time had gone by, and I heard a knock at the door. And I had ran away because I was so used to running, because it was always somebody came and knocked at my door. It wasn't because they were visiting. It was most likely it was the cops, and they were coming for me, you know. So I was ready to jump over the fence, and my wife calls me. She goes, there's this lady here who wants to talk to you. She says, are you Frank Romero? I said, yes, ma'am. She goes, you know Paola? I said, yeah. She goes, she's the owner of this house. You know, I told her, I go, yeah, she's the owner of this house. And she said, well, she says that you did some work at her house and you've done some work here, so you're going to assume the loan. You're taking over the house. I said, but I can't afford it. I have no good credit. She goes, well, she's code signed for you. She goes, and all you got to do is sign here, and the house is yours. You pay the closing costs. And she goes, I'm only going to charge you half, which at the time was like $500. And so we agreed to it. And that same day I went to my father-in-law's and I said, hey, Richard, I need some money. And I told him the situation, and he says, craziest thing, man. I've been selling this motorcycle for the longest time. Nobody's been wanting to buy it. And right before you got here, I sold it. He goes, here's the money. You know, the lady shows up with the paperwork. My wife calls me crying. Shows up with the paperwork for our house. A bunch of food and gifts for the kids. We had nothing. And with an envelope full of money, she had taken a collection in Century 21. You know, and we made our house a home. You know, we just celebrated our 32 years of being married, and, you know, if it wasn't for God, none of this would have happened.
So how old were you when you had that moment where you cried out to God? How old were you then?
I was 29 years old.
You're 29. And so at that moment, it was a radical change. Everything
Changed.
Everything changed.
Everything.
Wow, that's amazing. That's a miracle.
I didn't go through any withdrawals. I didn't go through nothing. It was just, to me, it was amazing because God set me free.
So even just, because obviously those 29 years you grew up, angry, bitter, violent, just all these negative emotions and, personas, and it was just all gone.
It was all gone.
Wow, amazing.
God completely set me free. It's like they say, God forgives. The world doesn't, but God forgives. I still run into people now that know me from way back when, and if they owe me money or whatever, they're trying to run away. But I'm trying to tell them that not to worry about it. You know what I mean? Because they still think I'm the same person that I used to be. Right years after we gotten saved, this was years later, I had taken the kids to go see the monster trucks. And there was a guy there that I was trying to kill years ago. And when we get there, I see him as I'm walking down the aisle. I could see him sitting on top with his family. And so what I did is I walked my wife and my kids, and then we went up towards him, and then I sat down and I gave him my back. Because I figured if he was going to do something, that was his time, But I was trying to show him that I wasn't afraid of him, and that, he's the one. He was more worried about me than me of him. And after sitting there for a while, I told my wife, I'm going to take the kids down and let them ride they have rides on the monster trucks, and went and got them some tickets where they can get on. And I came back to sit down with my wife, and when I came back, she says, "Hey, Frank, did you know that guy that was sitting behind us with his family?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "His name is Danny." Because when you left with the kids to go get on the truck, he came and tapped me on the shoulder and asked me, "Is that Frank Romero?" And I said, "Yes." And him and his family took off, because people don't have the understanding of what true salvation is. They don't have the understanding of what God really does. When God sets us free, he truly sets us free. That bitterness, that hate, that anger is no longer there. Not that we're perfect. We're far from being perfect. But we become more Christ-like. That emptiness has been filled. That void is no longer there, And so we learn how to love people, instead of hate people, And then the craziest thing about it is that a couple of years later, he shows up to the church, and when there was an altar call, I went and sat next to him, and as soon as I called his name, he looked at me and he started to cry. And I said, "You need to understand that I am no longer the person I used to be." And I prayed with him, and he accepted Christ as his Lord and Savior. People, we as Christians need to show people that Jesus loves them and that there is hope. They say, how can I serve a God I can't see? Well, they see him in you, and your testimony and the things that you do and how you act. The man I shared earlier, the man that I stabbed in the throat 8 times, today is serving God. He's been serving God for 15 years, and I stabbed him in the throat. He tells people, if it wasn't because I know that this guy was the devil himself, he goes, and I seen what God has done in his life, he goes, I wouldn't be serving God today. And I talk to him almost every day, because that's what God does. God restores what the enemy has taken, God gives us in return. Everything that the devil has taken from us, God will give back to us. You know, and even though I had gone through what I had gone through growing up, at that time I wasn't too happy about it, you know. But now I look back and I say, man, if, you know, I went through what I went through and now I could use it to glorify God's name, why not?
Yep.
Why not?
So I have some questions just to go back and kind of tie up some loose ends. Just real quickly, kind of go through some stuff. Okay, so your father, is he still around now, or
No, my father passed away about 10 years ago.
about 10 years? Okay, so after you got saved, how was that relationship with your father?
It was good. It was good. He, you know, I would, you know, go hang out with him, and I try to be an example to him. You know, he accepted Christ before he passed away.
Great.
You know, he lived a Jehovah Witness life for a long time because he was allowed to drink. So, you know what I mean? So that was his thing. And, but, you know, he accepted Jesus, and I believe that he's in heaven, you know. But we didn't have a perfect relationship, but we had a good relationship.
Okay, well, that's good. And then, so as part of this restoration in your life of that God was, you know, working in your life, when it came to your mom, did you have, I mean, obviously I'm sure you had some bitterness and some anger against the guy who did it. Was that forgiveness? Was that just boom, set in at that moment too? Or was that something you had to kind of work through later?
No, I when I got saved, I forgave him. I went down there to go kill the guy, you know, but a lot of things happened. Cops got interfered. My brother got loud, so they put the guy under protective custody. Before I was saved, my plan was to kill the guy, to get rid of him, because I felt that was my duty as a son, as the older brother. You know what I mean? And so, but when I got saved, I actually prayed for the man, you know what I mean? Because, you know, I really don't know what happened. You know what I mean? I just hear, well, you know, she opened the door. He was going to shoot my mom's boyfriend. She got in the way, and then he shot her. And I don't really know what happens, but all I know is that when I gave my life to Christ, I had to put everything, not just, I couldn't pick and choose. I had to put everything in God's hands, you know, and that's really where it's all at.
Real quick, Pastor, did that guy go to prison?
Yes, they gave him. The guy was like in his 70s, bro.
Oh, wow.
So they got him for manslaughter, which in the state of California is 8 years.
Oh,
But it's 2 for 1, so you only serve 4.
oh, wow.
You know.
Wowzers.
So looking back at your life, did you, you know, obviously you were a violent individual, caused a lot of chaos and I'm sure harm. Do you ever look back at your life with regret and be like, man, and like about the people that you hurt or anything like that?
Well, you know, there was a time in my life when I did, okay, but I noticed that was just keeping me from doing God's will.
So part of the restoration is you forgiving yourself.
Yes.
Yep.
Now there's certain people that I wish I could run into and just say I'm sorry. I've had that opportunity to run into certain people, certain young ladies, certain guys, and say I'm sorry, and it blows their mind, you know, when they see me say I'm sorry to them. But it's just part of what I believe that's just what part of our salvation. It's part of what God's doing. Part of the restoring of our lives, of our hearts. You know, when I was in California, pastoring in California, when I was leaving, I was selling some of my stuff. I was real bitter towards cops. I hated cops because, you know, in the LA County, it was just like a lot of crooked cops. And when I was selling my stuff, a guy called and said that he wanted my stuff, so I needed to drive down to another town to go take it to him. As I got there, I got off the truck, so I see these 2 white guys by a garage and 2 ladies, and they were older people. And I got off, and I started walking towards him. And I remember this guy, he just kept on staring at me. And so I'm walking up to him, and then I shake one of the guy's hands, the lady's hands. I went to go shake his hand. And as I went to go shake his hand, he goes, "Where are you from?" I go, I'm from Tucson, bro. I said, but I pastored in Long Beach. He goes, no. He goes, what gang are you from? I said, oh, I'm from Harbor City, man. I grew up in the projects. He goes, what do they call you? I go, they call me Termite. And he grabs my hand and he hugs me. And he says, I'm so sorry. I said, for what? He goes, I remember you. I remember you. I just want to apologize for everything I'd done to you when you were little, because, we'd get abused by the cops. And I remember, I said, don't worry about it. It's all under the blood, brother. He says, you don't understand. He goes, I've been saved for so many years. He goes, and when I seen you, I remembered you. And all I wanted to say was, I'm sorry. And I really believe that God puts people in our lives like that because there's certain people that we have to say we're sorry to, Not because if we don't, we're not saved. I believe that we have to, because that's part of maturity in our Christian walk. Mm-hmm. It's part of our growth,
I guess I'd say one of the last things is just to resolve with what happened with the gangs, the ones after you left, you went to Tucson. Did they still have did the green light ever go away? Were they ever fine with you? Or?
I was actually preaching for Pastor Chayo Perez up in New Mexico.
Yeah, he's got a crazy story too.
And as I was there in New Mexico, me and Chayo have been friends for years. And I was sharing my testimony. We had gone to go do the gang play, the Once to Die play. And as we're there doing the play, I share my testimony. And when I share my testimony, I get off the stage. We're at like big YMCA, and I walk down this big stage. And when I walk down, there's a guy at the bottom of the stairs, and he's like an old cholo, And he goes, where you from, bro? I said, I'm from Tucson. He goes, no, you're not. I said, really? I said, where am I from? And he goes, you're from Harbor City. I said, really? Now you got to understand, where I grew up, 90% of it is projects. There's only like 5 little blocks. Everything is projects, government apartment. I'm maybe exaggerating, but there's about 10,000 apartments. And he says, I go, do you know me? And he says, I think so. I said, who are you? He goes, they call me Boxer. I said, Sleepy's your brother, right? He's like, yeah. I remember fighting your brother a long time ago. I go, do you know who I am? I go, they call me Termite, bro. And he goes, you're that vato from that murder. He goes, there's a hit on you? He goes, and the dude that has your hit is here in Albuquerque. I said, really? I said, well, here's my business card. Give me a call. And I walked away. There was a youth rally going on in the Tucson church 6 months later. And as I'm there, I'm trying to make a long story short. I go into the bathroom, and there's a guy in there with a cane, with the little cholo brim, His face is all tatted, arms are all tatted. And so we're in there using the bathroom, whatever, us guys, we could talk in the bathroom. I said, where you from, bro? He goes, you don't remember me, bro? I said, nah, I don't remember you. He goes, it's me, it's your homeboy Mosco. Now, he had gone to prison for a murder, 25 years. And he goes, why don't you tell me what happened that night, bro? So, all right. So I explained to him what had happened. And so few months later, I'm at there's going to be a conference going on in Tucson. And the guy who has my hip, there's two guys, one's in LA, the other one's in New Mexico. So the one in LA had gotten into a real bad car accident where a semi had hit him and threw him over the bridge, and he ended up being a paraplegic. And if anybody would have killed me, it's him. And I know it would have, because he was very bitter towards me. And when he was in the hospital, I would have them go down there and put the phone to his ear, and I would pray for him, but he wouldn't tell me a word. I mean, he could talk, he just didn't tell me a word. I prayed for him until he came out of the hospital. And so I flew the guy in that had my hit, and I flew some of my homeboys in. They all came in, and at that time there was something else that had happened, because one of my compadres, he was from White Fence, and he had gotten murdered also, and it was something I needed to settle with that also, because his son was my godson, and I needed to take care of some stuff. Like I said, I've never been in prison. I've never been involved with all that politics stuff. I grew up in the streets. I was a gang member. I was from Harbor City. I was a Sureño, but I'd never gotten involved in all that. But they were. So they were all there. And I remember telling my wife, she says, "What are you doing?" She says, I said, "I'm flying these guys in." And she goes, "Why?" She goes, "Aren't you afraid they're going to kill you?" I said, "Well, didn't you tell me to trust in God?" And she goes, "And where are they going to stay?" I said, "Here." And so as they came, they got to the house. This friend of mine, he came and he says, "Where are they at?" He goes, "So there's two guys. These guys are, they're involved in the politics, and they said, we'll take care of it for you, bro. Don't worry about it." And I said, "No, that's not the way we do things anymore. It's not the way I do things anymore." And so we sat down and we talked. And I explained to them, because they always thought I had something to do with the murder. And it was a Father's Day. It was Father's Day. I remember it was Father's Day. Because my wife, I had ordered a bunch of food, and we're sitting on the table at my house, and we're all eating, and we're talking about everything that was going on and what was happening. And my kids would come. I had 9 kids, so they would come, "Hey, Dad, I brought you this." So they'd bring me a gift, and they'd bring me a card. And I would read the card, and just the words that my kids would say, "Thank you, Daddy, for everything. We love you. You're a great father. You're a great this." And I would pass it around. I'd say, "Read it." And then, and as the kids would come, I would read it, and I'd pass it, and they would read it. And by the time we were done and they were done reading the cards, they were broken. You could see that they wanted what I had. And before they left, they had prayed and asked Jesus into their heart. I believe one of them is pastoring now. He's not part of the fellowship, but he's pastoring. I have a couple of other friends that are going. I got one friend that's going to pastor up in Vegas, Pastor Lamb's church, and some of his kids are going there. A couple of them are going to Pastor Strutt's church, but God knows what He's doing. God redeems. In the process of me getting saved, that was something that God had put in my heart. He says, "Start praying for your homeboys." Now God doesn't speak slang like we do, but He does. He knows what He's doing. He says, "Start praying for your neighborhood. Start praying for your homeboys." And as I started to do that, they started to get saved. And when I went to California to pastor out there, the same homeboy that was there when I got jumped in, which he was a veterano, one of the older homies, was the same one that whispered in my ear and told me, need to get out of here before they kill you, man. These guys are going to kill you. Was the first one that called me and says, you know, this is, I can't even remember what name he gave me because, you know, we don't know each other's names. All we know is nicknames. He says, I'm a counselor, da, 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 da. If you could please give me a call. And I remember I called him and I said, yes, sir. You know, this is Frank Romero. I was calling you. I just want to return your call. He says, I know you don't know me by this name, bro. He goes, but it's me. It's your homeboy Bear. He goes, I just wanted to tell you that there was always something different about you. I heard that you're pastoring here now, man. He goes, and I've always noticed that there was something different about you. He goes, and now we know what it is. He goes, I need you to go pray for someone. One of my homegirls was dying, and so I got into the hospital, and I had prayed with this guy and I was out in the streets, and he was an Aryan brother. Big old tall white guy, looked like White Earp, big old mustache, and I said, Randy, I'm taking you with me. So we're gonna walk into this place, and there's gonna be gang members everywhere, bro. And some of them may still want to kill me. And he goes, Pastor, I got your back. I said, we're gonna go in there, bro. We're gonna be a testimony for Jesus. We're not gonna go and be who they are. We're gonna be who we are. I remember walking in there, and I prayed with about 150 people in this place at one time. We did a massive prayer. I remember when I was walking in, everybody was like, hey, Frank, what's up? Long time no see. I remember praying with my homegirl, and I prayed with everybody there, and I left that place, and, you know, I've never gone back. You know, I needed to do that. That needed to be part of my salvation. That needed to be part of my walk, you know. And, you know, I've been serving God now for 27 years, and, you know, I'm so grateful, you know. And I've been through the storm. I've been through some big storms. I'm going through a storm right now. But you know what? My eyes are on Jesus. Pastor, how can you? My eyes are on Jesus. You know, my eyes are on Jesus. I try not to look at the waves. Try not to look at the wind, you know, because I know that God's in control of everything.
So obviously, I mean, you got a pretty crazy life, crazy story. I'm sure we can talk for another 2 hours.
Yes, sir.
We haven't even talked about, I'm curious about your church now on the reservation, just on everything you deal with there. You know, there's lots of stuff, ministerial stuff we haven't talked about. But I think, you know, what you've said is very powerful. Definitely can reach a lot of people, hopeless, you know, people that feel lost and unloved, kind of the emotions you went through. Obviously, the life experience you went through is pretty unique, but the emotions you went through are pretty common, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So,
you know, and it's really, you know, to be honest with you, it's really helped me, you know, everything that I went through, you know, like even when I pastored in California.
Can you pull the mic closer?
Move it closer.
There you go.
When I was living in California, I was able to show a lot of the guys there how to love. You know what I mean? You know, and you know, so it was, to me, it was all a learning experience. And then when I evangelized for a while, and probably for about 3 years, and then I went to I took over the church in the O'odham Nation. The first thing that I did was show them that I loved them. You know what I mean? Because now I know what true love is. You know, and I'm able to talk to the people in my church, and you know, it's not like it doesn't even feel weird to tell them, hey, I love you. You know what I mean? You know, when I'm done talking to a sister, counseling somebody, say, hey, I love you. You know what I mean? And they go, we love you too, Pastor. You know, because it's to me, it's so important. You know, well, I had gone to do a funeral, and so you got to understand that, you know, the O'odham Nation is very big. It's 2.3 million acres, and so there's different districts. And I had gone into another district to go do a funeral for someone that didn't come to church. But it's very big, and so I go down there with some of my people, and I go do this funeral, and they always feed you, and so they always want to make sure they feed the pastor first. And when I reached out to grab my food, there was a little old lady handing me my food, and she seen my hands. And the first thing that came out of her mouth was, she goes, you're the pastor that everybody talks about. You're the pastor that came out of the same kind of lifestyle as we did. And that means so much to me. It really does. Because I have a granddaughter that's Native. She's O'odham also. And when she was born is when I took over the church. Every time she turns a year old, that's how long I've been in the church. So it means so much to me to be able to be able to make an impact in people's lives. You look at yourself and you say, how can God use me? How can God use a man that has no education, a man that never went to school, a man that doesn't know how to read the Bible, a man that, and God said, I can use anybody, My pastor had said to me years ago, he had called me out in a service, and he said to me, he says, you think that God's not going to use you because you don't know how to read? He goes, but the same way God used Moses, God's going to use you, And I believe that. I believe that God's been using me.
Absolutely.
I don't let it affect me in any kind of way. You know what I'm saying? If I don't know how to say a word, I'll figure it out. You know what I mean? I was trying to figure out how to say the Euphrates River. What is it called?
Euphrates.
Yeah, that river. Because I want to be able to explain to people, hey, because I do my homework. I do want them to understand that God is real and that he's coming soon and that he can restore what the enemy has taken. That's what I want people to understand. I want them to understand that this isn't about religion. This is about a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, that you don't have to be out there looking for love in all the wrong places, that you can find love in Christ, that he can restore what the enemy has taken, and that's one of the things I love the people in my church. They, I preach to them, and every time I preach to them, it's like, I'm doing this revival right now for you guys. You guys, you see me every 2-3 years, let's say, and I could put up with them for a week, but these people see me all the time, and I can make them laugh every single time. I can make them cry every single time. You know what I mean? And they understand me and I understand them, and they know that I'm there because I love them. Pastor, I drive an hour. My church is an hour away. It's all highway. I got to drive a whole highway. I got to get I got to get through the city before that hour starts. And I go down there and I preach the word of God. And then when I'm done, I drive all the way back home and I make sure my wife stays home so she can get some rest. And then the evening I drive back by myself. And they're like, how can you do this? How can I not do this? Jesus did it for me. He walked. I got a car. You know what I mean? He walked. He was willing to give his life for me no matter how messed up I was, He gave his life for me. Now, how can I not do for his children? How can I not do with the people that he has entrusted into me?
Yep. Powerful, powerful stuff, man. I mean, jeez. It is one. I think it's one of the longest podcasts we ever recorded, right? It's it's over 2 hours. And then there's a lot more that we can say.
Well, I try to shorten it up.
Yeah. But is there any final thoughts, final things, Daniel, before we close it out? No? Well, powerful words, Pastor. We're so excited about having you here and the revival that we're doing. I mean, when this thing drops, it'll be 2 months since we recorded. Thank you for your time and sharing this. And I know there's a lot more, and maybe we can find a way to get more stuff, more of your testimony out there.
Happy to.
And but we're gonna thank you for being here. We're going to sign off. Me here and Luis Perez, aka Guicho Breach, and my co-host producer Daniel Martinez. Amen. And so we'll see you on the next one. We're out. Peace.
Our relationship still didn't grow. It still didn't. It wasn't the main focus. Now looking back, it wasn't his main focus, you know. And I see now that the way that my father parented me and my siblings, his main responsibility that he saw, that he felt he had, was just to provide. And you see that with many men out there today, you know, but I saw that firsthand in my father. And
So you didn't have a close relationship with him?
no, not at all. And in Philippines, you know, for so many years you could, you know, say that excuse, oh, you know, he worked abroad, understandably, because, you know, there's not much out here in Philippines. But when we moved to America, still there wasn't anything. So at that point, it's like, okay, Dad, you know, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
You know, it's a part of my life that I'm just now starting to even come into terms with. I'm like, okay, that really happened. I can't run away from this anymore.
Did you block it out of your memory for a while?
I did. I tried to, at least, but I couldn't. And whenever the memories will pop up, I'm like, man, am I always going to run away from this? Is there ever going to be an opportunity where this is going to be handled, this is going to be dealt with?
Did your parents know about it? What was going on, or
Not then.
it wasn't
I
until
don't
later
know.
on, or
I don't even know if they did, you know. I brought it up a few months ago when my family came here to San Antonio.
Oh, so just recent. That's very recent.
It's recent, you know, so it's still fresh.
Yes,
The
yeah.
way that it was brought up. Yeah, looking back how my mind was, you know, so perverted.
corrupted?
Bro,
Yeah.
it's so corrupted, bro. I remember, man, being in 6th grade in middle school. I was already lusting on women, on these young girls. You know what I mean? And I thought that was okay. I really thought that okay, this is just who I am, you know? And I'm like, God, help me. All the times I'm praying these prayers, my flesh is wanting the opposite. And though I'm torn, I could feel God's guidance. I could feel his protection over my life, you know, that kept me pure throughout, to some extent,
Right.
pure,
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
you know, throughout high school. You know, I tried to rebel, you know, and it led me astray. I remember I would just be in my room. It was just dark. And man, I was filled with so much depression, so much darkness in there. And thoughts of suicide started rolling in,
Oh, wow.
you know, and I was such in a depressive state, you know, that all my friends had the same spirit. We all just mingled together, just all depressed bunch of teenagers, you know, after high school. We're all trying to find our way in life. You know, I remember there's a parking lot that we parked the rental in, and immediately we could hear music. I look up like this in the building behind me, and I see this big old window and naked women. You know, they're just having a party, just dancing around. You know what I mean? And my boy was like, okay, that's the place. Okay, that's the place. And so we go in. I'm like, man, you know what? It is what it is. I'm in Europe, you know. So what Jesus says at this point, I'm going to do what I want to do. You know, all these years.
I'm on
of pent
vacation.
up. Yeah. And so vacation spiritually too. You know, I could just pick it up later on. Man, but yeah, I followed through with it. That's where I lost my virginity, man.
Oh, man.
That's where it was. And I remember it was, man, just even, I remember when I first shared this story to my wife, man, I never experienced panic attacks, bro. But in that moment that I was sharing to my wife, I had one. Like I could see, and then depression came back stronger. Darkness, it was just glooming over me even stronger when we started fornicating. And it came to a point where later on in our dating months, I was like, man, I can't do this. You know what I mean? I got tired of it. You know, I got tired of being depressed. I got tired of being robbed of the joy and the peace that God had. I would get so much sleep paralysis in those months. It's not even funny. It was almost like every other night.
Oh, my goodness.
I would wake up in the middle of the night. It was just, I couldn't move, you know, and I grabbed my broomstick and I started smashing it right in front of her. She closed the door on me. She didn't want to see that. You know what I mean? I was just there, it was in that moment, it really shocked me. I'm like, man, I didn't know I could rage like that. Because all
you never done that before.
all these years, all my friends, oh, you're one of the most chill people. You talk so chill too. You from California, and it just so happened I get stationed in California, you know. And so that really shocked me that I have the capability to rage out like that, especially in front of my wife. I try to do all of this tactics, strategies to kick off this habit, but I couldn't find the willpower out of me to just walk out of it. I kept going back into watching, but in that moment, that season, that's when I really found deliverance.
Maybe that's when you finally broke that bondage.
Yeah, and it makes me see now that when it comes to deliverance, a person really has to want it.
Yeah, of course.
You know what I mean? The person really has
Absolutely.
to want it. And a person who's struggling with an addiction, who keeps finding his way, her way back into it, is just be honest with yourself. You want to do it. You know what I mean? Because if you really didn't, you know what I mean? God is willing to help you. He'll give you the strength to walk away from that. In that moment, that's where I experienced deliverance. I can still remember what Pastor preached. He was preaching about having a foundation built on Jesus, you know, and everything was speaking on into my life in that
Timely
moment.
message.
It was so timely, I tell you, because, you know, being in a new state, being a new, trying to pursue God now. I just left the military. I don't even know what job I'm going to do next. I had HVAC lined up, but I didn't even have that already working for me yet. You know what I mean? There's so many uncertainty up ahead, you know, and yet there's this sermon that says, whatever it is, build your life on Jesus. Man, it spoke so loudly in my heart because
Praise
leading up, even before we left California, I was like, God, I really need a church that you want for us.